everyone, and welcome to the November 10th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. We'll call this meeting to order at 1:03. Ms. Fennessy, can we get a roll call, please?
Thank you. I'll go ahead and start with Chair Escobedo.
Here.
Vice Chair Bronderson will be joining us shortly. She's having some internet connection issues. And Commissioner Bauke.
Here.
Commissioner Higgins is absent. Commissioner Lodge.
Here.
Commissioner Wardlow.
Here.
And Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. We'll go to 2A, which is requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of ex-agenda items. Ms. DeBus, do we have any?
Thank you, Chair Escobedo. We have none.
And how about any announcements or appeals?
No announcements and no appeals.
Thank you. So that takes us to 2C, which is review, consideration, and action on the following draft Planning Commission meeting minutes and resolutions. We have October 14, 2022, a joint Historic Landmarks Commission and Planning Commission special meeting minutes. October 20th, 2022, Planning Commission meeting minutes. Resolution number 009-22, 402 South Hope Avenue, and Planning Commission resolution number 010-22, 1336 Shoreline Drive. Are there any edits to any of the meeting minutes or resolutions? I'm not seeing any, so do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the October 14th, October 20th meeting minutes and the two resolutions.
Second.
So we have a motion from Commissioner Wiscombe, a second from Commissioner Lodge. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. Ms. Fennessy, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Thank you. I'll go ahead and start with Commissioner Bauke.
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge.
Yes.
Commissioner Wardlow.
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Yes.
And Chair Escobedo.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. And so we will now move to 2D, which is comments from members of the public pertaining to items not on today's agenda. And we do not have any speaker slips, but Ms. Fennessy, do we have anyone online that would like to give public comment for items not on today's agenda?
Thank you. We did receive 2 general public comments that were distributed to the Planning Commission prior to this meeting. And at this time, we do not have any remote public commenters, so I'll bring it back to the Commission.
Thank you. And we will close out item 2, and we'll move on to item 3. It's a new item. It is 1218 Shoreline Drive. This is a 5,600 square foot site, currently developed with a 1-story single unit residence with an attached 1-car garage. The project involves demolition of the existing residence, including all on-site structures, and construction of a new 2-story, 1,876 square foot single unit residence with a 843 square foot, 100% below grade basement, and a detached building comprised of a 403 square foot 2-car garage and a 340 square foot ADU. And we have Ms. Plummer here to give the staff presentation. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Escobedo. Okay, so as described in the project description, the project before you today is at 1218 Shoreline Drive. The project involves demolition of an existing single-story residence with a 1-car garage, including all other on-site structures, and construction of a new 2-story residence with a 100% below-grade basement. The project also includes a new detached garage, 2-car garage with an accessory dwelling unit above, relocation of the existing driveway you'll see on the screen. The driveway to the left, it's going to be relocated, so there'll be a new driveway and curb cut, as well as additional hardscape and landscape improvements. This is just an aerial shot of the project site. It's located in a single-family residential neighborhood between La Marina and Las Ondas, and is also across the street from Shoreline Park. This table just goes over the zoning consistency for the project. It is consistent with the zoning ordinance, and they're not asking for any modifications. They are going from a non-conforming 1-car garage to a 2-car garage, so they will be conforming to parking. And also, as far as the floor to lot area ratio, they're at 100% of the maximum allowable floor area. This includes the resident net square footage of the residence, the garage, and ADU cumulatively. The project was reviewed by the Single Family Design Board on 2 occasions, first in December of 2021 and in August of 2022. In both cases, the Single Family Design Board was generally supportive of the project. They did have some comments about finessing some of the proportions of the design, both to the residence and ADU, but overall they found the proposed structures to be consistent with the neighborhood character and overall size, bulk, and scale to be appropriate. The project was reviewed by staff for consistency with the Coastal Act, as well as applicable coastal land use plan policies. Some of those are shown on the screen below, and to the right is just a rendering that was prepared by the applicant. The project will be providing, as I noted, conforming parking, so they will be providing 2 spaces for the residents and no parking is required for the ADU as it's not located in a key public access area. They also are required to meet Tier 3 stormwater management requirements, so they will be providing a portion of hardscape to self-treating landscape areas and runoff to a permeable paver driveway over an infiltration basin for retention and hydro modification. There are a number of policies that apply regarding visual resources, and these cover anything from design review to compatible development and visual evaluation requirements. As part of the project and review by the Single Family Design Board, the applicant prepared a number of supplemental materials for the SFDB to review at the 2 hearings. So on the screen you'll see just a proposed street elevation that shows the top with the existing residence and then the proposed residence below, as well as a study of the FAR of the neighborhood and additional 3D renderings to assess visual resources and compatibility with the neighborhood. The project was found by staff to be exempt per California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA exemption 15301, existing facilities, which allows for the demolition of an existing residence and other small structures, as well as 15303, which allows for construction of up to 3 residences, including other accessory structures. And that concludes my presentation. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission approve the coastal development permit with the required findings and subject to the conditions of approval that were included in the staff report. Thank you. Oh, and Liz Hughes is here representing the project from the applicant side.
Thank you, Ms. Plummer. Welcome, Ms. Hughes. Great, yeah. And if you could just introduce yourself again, and then you will have 15 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Escobedo and councilors. My name is Liz Hughes, representing for Tom Oxner Architect. And Pilar did a great presentation of the history of this project. We've been to the SFDB twice with positive comments. They found that the proposed development was consistent with the mass, bulk, and scale of the surrounding neighborhood. There are, on this particular block of shoreline, it's characterized by mainly 2-story structures that are of a similar architectural design and character. And so we thought that our proposal fit in well with the neighborhood. Do I ask if I want to show particular?
Yes, I have the plans as well as site photos, so whatever you want me to pull up, I can do that.
Okay. Let's go to the photos. These are photos of the existing site. It starts in the backyard area. You can see to the southwest of the property, there's an existing large hedge that provides privacy to the neighbor's property. There's also landscaping along the back of the property for the neighboring two-story residence. Tom's here. He'll probably want to take over for me in a minute here. And go to the next slide, Pilar, or whoever's controlling. This also shows landscaping to the northeasterly side. This is the location of the proposed garage and ADU. And we discussed with the SFDB about privacy concerns for the deck there and just taking into account minimizing that second-story deck as much as possible, kind of pulling it back in. So we made a couple of design changes to accommodate privacy for the neighbors in that location. That's kind of looking at the neighbor's property where there are no windows on their second story, kind of overlooking where the drive court is going to be located. This is the back of the existing residence that's proposed to be demolished, and just an aerial of the surrounding neighborhood. And you can kind of see from these streetscapes how the massing of the surrounding residences are similar to what we're proposing here as well. Just views to across the street and just views around the neighborhood. So one thing that we did want to address was the neighbor letter, which we have been reviewing and which we also received during the SFDB review process. And part of that had to do with the massing of the building, the size of the building. And one thing that we looked at very carefully throughout this process was reducing the size as much as possible. So the main residence is actually a little bit less than 1,900 square feet. The ADU is only, I think it's 320 square feet or 360. And at our first review, we did have a larger proposal because at that time the ADU was not included as part of the FAR calculation. So in an effort to meet all of the zoning requirements without needing any modifications, we revised our design both to adjust the building. We did have a solar restriction on 2 property lines, so we pulled the building away and pushed down the plate heights as much as possible, while also keeping that accessory dwelling unit, the 2-story building, as low as we could to make that work. And also shrinking down the second-story mass of that as well. Tom, is there anything you'd like to add?
I think maybe I can add a few elements to the, did you go over the 3 reasons for putting the garage in the back?
I didn't. Go ahead.
Yeah.
And if you could just introduce yourself for folks that are watching.
Yes, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, my name's Tom Oxner, project architect along with Liz, and I just would like to touch on our space planning for this project. So along Shoreline here, there are a variety of space planning models in terms of, and throughout the mesa, of either putting garages behind the structure or putting garages up against the frontage. So typically on these narrow lots, when you put a garage attached to the house, it runs the entire frontage from setback to setback. The advantage of putting, say, a garage behind the house is kind of threefold. One in being that it allows a little bit more facade of the residence to face the view. The other advantage, which is really important on some of these high traffic areas like Shoreline, is it allows a long driveway which can absorb some parking during high impact times. So it's good to be able to, if you're having friends over, they always have the option of the tandem parking on site. And then another reason as well would be to provide for the streetscape, to provide a little bit more airspace between the buildings. When you move some of the mass behind, you get a little bit, instead of just the setback to setback across the width of the driveway, forces a little bit more open space between the buildings rather than just have everything go setback to setback. I think that's all I had to say on that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. And does that conclude the applicant presentation? All right. And with that, we will open up public comment. We do not have any speaker slips for in-person public comment, but Ms. Fennessy, do we have anyone online?
Thank you. If you would like to make a remote public comment, please follow the instructions on screen. And at this time, I do not see any hands raised, but we did receive one public comment letter, and that was distributed to the Planning Commission prior to this meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. So we'll turn it back to the commission for questions. And Commissioner Balke, I see you have your light on.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have a couple questions for the applicant and staff. Could you walk us through the solar requirements? And we've got a situation which you have 2 solar requirements. Explain how that comes about and how that affects the location of the building that you're proposing. And a question to staff, how much flexibility is there in that requirement? So
Sure.
that's my question.
Well, I'll start off as far as flexibility. They're required to meet the solar ordinance, and this particular property very narrowly has 2 northerly lot lines, so both of those property lines are subject to our solar ordinance, and if you were to not meet our solar ordinance, you would need a modification, so that would be the process. I'm not sure, as far as this project, which level of modification it would, because there's different tiers for the solar modification. But yes, they would need that discretionary approval if they were to not meet our solar ordinance.
Okay, so to the applicant, could you walk us through your thought
Sure.
process of how you address the ordinance?
Okay. Could we go to the site plan sheet? So at the corner where the accessory dwelling unit is, both of those property lines are considered northerly property lines, which in order to meet the solar access requirement, you extend up 12 feet from grade, and then it extends up at an angle of 30 degrees. So any portion of our building cannot intersect that. The reason why the main residence is shifted to the other side is because it is taller than the ADU. So we would not have been able to have as large of a second story on that residence if it were along that property line. The ADU has much lower plate heights, so we were able to locate it closer, although on the second story, we also did step it back from the setback line to accommodate a little bit more solar access on that side as well. And if we go to the elevation sheets, you can see that angular line with the 30 degrees is what we're looking at in terms of being beneath that line for the design of the main house, and then for the design of the ADU. You can see this one actually has 2 sides of the building that are up against that line there.
You answered my question, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Wiscombe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to understand in plain English. I'm looking at the, excuse me, the comments on this letter. So the garage is not attached. This is for the applicant. Did you explore attaching the garage, or just explain again why you're not attaching the garage?
Yes, Chair Wiscombe and Commissioners. So we looked at the two options, of course, in the beginning, attaching and non-attaching. The reason we're not attaching it is because the owners wished to stretch the, as much windows, get as much of a view along the frontage, and the width of a driveway is less than the width of a two-car garage. That's one reason. And the additional reason is if we put the garage deep into the property, it would allow the occasional tandem parking of guests.
Right, that you
That can
mentioned
come up and
before.
not sit on the sidewalk or the, yeah, so that's two. And from an architectural perspective, when you have a varying airspace between houses as you're looking at them, it's sometimes better to have a variety and not have all of the houses push as much mass up against the street, because the void of the driveway creates a bit of a relief of volume as you look at the massing of the house on the street.
Okay, that explains that. Okay, and then I appreciate your explanation. That's clearer to me now. And then their second concern, it says the current design will reach from setback to setback on the upper story. Is that the case here, or it didn't quite, I couldn't tell from the elevation if,
Commissioner Wiscombe, I think if I had to read into that comment, it might mean that if you were, say, standing across the street on Shoreline and you're looking at the residence, if you look beyond the residence down the driveway, you'll see maybe the garage beyond it. Possibly that might be where that comment is coming from.
I get it. Okay, because I wrote no here because I didn't quite see
Yeah,
that.
I'm just trying to, yeah,
okay.
I think.
Yeah, okay, and then their next concern was on sheet T-1.4. Is that right, T? I don't know. Ms. Plummer, do you have that? Yeah, T-1.4, yeah, isn't that what I just said? So they're saying that the proposed elevation, I just think it's good to address these in public. So they're saying that the elevation appears to show open spaces on the east-facing side of the property. We'll call it the northeast, since I live on the Mesa, and that's the east side as far as I'm concerned, not the north side. But and then it's not included. Is this drawing here such that because the driveway is so long that the garage and ADU kind of fade into the background here? Is that why this is drawn like this?
Commissioner Wiscombe, could you allude to the portion of the letter that we're referring to again?
Yes, it says, finally, in regard to the elevations on page T-1.4 of our copy, we notice that they seem somewhat deceptive. The elevation of 1218 appears to show open space on the east-facing side of the property, but the ADU garage is not included in this drawing. And it looks to me like the driveway is just so long that you've kind of faded it out.
Right. What we do is we provide separate elevations for that structure. That structure is well behind it, and it would actually be more misleading if we showed it in that image, because it's not really what you perceive when you're looking at the building. So if,
Okay.
you know, we err on showing elevations that are relatively in the same plane with each other and not
So you've
take it
shown
too.
the house, the face of the house, rather than down the
Correct.
driveway. Okay.
And just in addition to that, at one time, some of those comments are carryovers from our first SFDB meeting. They've been recycled a bit. And so one of the comments is going to refer to a neighbor's residence. And what we've done here is SFDB has been good in trying to get an idea of streetscapes like this. So what we do as architects, we do the best we can to draw the neighboring homes relative to how they fit. And we use a number of tools to do that with. 1222 originally was a little bit out of whack, and it's been fixed since then. So I think one of those comments relates to an older drawing that has since been corrected.
Yeah, and it does say it's cropped out of 1222 is a driveway along one side, but 1222 is a corner lot. Was that right, or?
No, it's
No.
it's got a garage behind it, similar to what we're doing. So that's why there's that
Oh,
that
okay.
there's more airspace to the left of that building.
Oh, okay. So they did something similar to what you're doing?
Right.
Okay.
Occasionally, a house will put the garage
Yeah.
behind, yes.
Okay, fine, I appreciate that. And then I don't know if this is for you or Ms. Plummer, whoever wants to answer it. The legal non-conforming one-car garage, was it non-conforming as the setback? Is that correct?
Non-conforming in terms of the amount of parking spaces. It's one
Oh,
covered
okay.
space.
Okay,
Right,
so
rather
that's why
than the
it's
two.
legal non-conforming?
Yes.
Is because it's only one, okay, great. So, and then my last question, which is something I brought up at the site visit, was the tree by the driveway, the new driveway. So, or driveway apron. So has the city arborist had a look at that in relation to, in rela-
Chair Wiscombe, yes, we have a letter just recently that came in
from Nathan?
yes, and that it,
Thank you. Vice Chair Wiscombe, yes, as part of our review, we did have Nathan Slack review the proposal, and he didn't express specific concerns. We also had transportation review it, and they're satisfied with the design of the driveway as in the palm to remain and no visibility
Yeah,
issues.
that, they
sightline
would be
issues.
sight lines,
Yeah.
but Mr. Slack would be.
Yes.
Would be the health of the tree, so, okay. So is it possible to get Mr. Slack on site, or one of his staff on site, when the driveway is laid out?
Vice Chair Wiscombe, I will defer to Ms. DeBusk. I believe that could be a condition on the
Okay.
project,
Yeah.
at your discretion.
I think we've done that before, yeah, recently. Okay, okay. And, yeah, that's all I have. I think the project fits very nicely into the architecture of the street. The street is just undergoing huge changes. So, because I go to Shoreline Park a lot, so very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Wardlow?
Thank you, Chair. I have one question actually for the applicant, or a few. So first, and I apologize if this was covered at a different point, but is this a home for like a resident here in town, or is this being developed to be sold, or who's running the project?
Commissioner Wardlow, yes. So it's a good friend of mine. We're on the third project with them. They're Mesa residents, and they have a large family. And so they're spreading their roots out. They have, his mother-in-law lives in one of the homes, I think. And so this is their home. And yes,
This is their primary residence?
this is Santa Barbara's their home, yes.
Okay. So when in reviewing the public comment and to Commissioner Wiscombe's points, when I read that comment, and maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but I'm seeing it as that the first floor and the second floor are congruently like the same. There's no, break up and divide via balconies or some more breakup of the building. Is that accurate? Are they pretty much like an asymmetrical block versus having some spacage so that it feels more broken up?
Well, the proposed residence does stack on
Stacks
on the east side, correct. It stacks on the east side. As you can see from this image, it stacks on the west side. This is a view from the east. That's the east elevation. It looks east. And so you can see that steps back, and the driveway is just in front of that there. And, but, in terms of, these small lots, to get just the FAR allowable, it requires a bit of stacking. The trick is to try to articulate that enough to where it doesn't really look like it is, and that's what we've been trying to do.
Okay. I appreciate that. Okay. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Vice Chair Bonderson?
Hello, everyone. Thank you. I have just a couple follow-up questions with Mr. Oshner and the architect team. I really appreciate these 3D views, and so I'd like to keep you here. I wanted to know if by any chance you could display the opposite side, not the side with the driveway, but if you have a rendering that shows the opposite side.
Commissioner Bonderson, I think we need to go to the, there we go. So we've got it up here, so I can.
Elevation.
The elevations. We don't have a 3D, I don't think.
That's okay.
In this of behind the building, no.
Not a problem. I just wanted to continue the question about how it's, the two floors are identical on the first floor or the second floor. There's, in other words, there's no stepping back. My interest here was to know what type of exploration your team may have done with regard to visibility from the second story into the neighboring property. Were you able to work together with the neighbors and the neighbor on this side? Has there been any comment with regard to that issue?
Yes, Commissioner Bonderson, so we've worked carefully with the three neighbors in this particular case, east, west, and to the north. Particularly probably the most sensitive direction is to the west, and we've worked with that neighbor to, I walked up into his house, we looked at the way that windows were aligning, we looked at where our windows were, and we've concluded that where our windows are on that west side, there may be, one of them's a bathroom, and the owners get along well, so there will be some adjustments potentially in putting some obscure glass in some of those locations. But they've got some pretty large windows that look over, so it's really hard sometimes to say, okay, well, especially in tight urban areas, just don't put any windows. But I think the key here is that we've been discussing the sensitivity of those windows and how clear they'll be. And then, of course, on the east side, I'm friends with that owner, and we have the driveway that creates a little bit of a buffer there. And Brian's he's looked at our plans, and he's comfortable with what we're proposing. And then, of course, behind to the north, we have the ADU that abuts there, and as you can see on that north elevation there, that northwest, there's just one window, well, really two, but they're pretty minor, and they're not. If there was a comment from the neighbor about those windows, we could look at it again or possibly put obscure glass. But yes, we have worked carefully with the neighbors.
Thank you for your detailed answer. I was mostly interested in the west, since it is the one that abuts the most closely. It's the most attached to the property line and direct sight lines. I'm not as concerned about the other directions. I do also want to follow up on Commissioner Wiscom's comments about the tree, especially if we are going to be adding a potential finding to this, excuse me, not finding, condition when we deliberate. Can we go back to, I believe it was A1.1 is the site plan that shows the driveway and the tree. There we are. When we were on site and we were discussing this, Commissioner Wiscom brought this to our attention, and we were discussing, in the event that once the layout of the driveway is completed and it's clear that there might be some type of obstruction or, in any way conflicting with the roots or whatnot, in an effort to preserve the tree, I just want to make sure that Mr. Oshner, yourself, the architect team, landscape team, that you've been, that you're willing to possibly curve the exit route a bit to the left of the tree, if I should say, while standing on the street looking at the property, the tree is on your right, you would possibly curve a little bit to the left. And whoever's driving the arrow, thank you, you're doing that well. Yes, have you considered the possibility that that might be a consideration?
Commissioner Bonderson, yes, in fact, we're doing that a little bit right now. As you can see, that driveway gestures a little bit towards the west, and we're certainly able to do that more depending on the results of the excavation and the roots. I have some concern myself about cutting any roots on a palm tree that's that tall, so I'm going to have a keen eye on the strength, really, of what we're doing relative to those trees, yes.
Excellent, thank you. And just a follow-up question to staff about that. In the event that there is some sort of conflict here, what would be the pathway? Would we then bring in Public Works to discuss a bit of a shift to that curb cut? Or the apron dimensions? How does that step work during construction?
Thank you, Commissioner Bonderson. If they had to make changes to the design associated with the driveway, it would be a revision. It would be looked at by Public Works, including our Transportation Division, to make sure that it's meeting everything that it needs to meet. That answers your question.
Yes, Ms. Plummer, thank you. I just want to make sure that there was a step in, that we could do during construction without slowing the process down. And if this meets the requirements to be added as a condition, I would urge the commission to look into that. Thank you. That concludes my questions. Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Vice Chair Bonderson. Any other questions from the commission? Not seeing any, so we will move to deliberations and eventually a motion. Who wants to kick it off? Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, as I said, I think the project fits in well with what's happening on Shoreline Drive. A lot of homes are getting reconstructed, and I think the architects did a great job on addressing that. You don't have any modifications, which is great. I think you've done a good job of addressing the public comment letter that we got from several of the, I guess, neighbors. And you've considered their concerns, so I think that's important. I would like to add a condition to the conditions of approval that addresses the triple-trunked palm tree located in the right-of-way in close proximity to the new curb cut, that shall be inspected by the city arborist for any sort of root conflicts when the driveway gets laid out. And if the driveway doesn't work there, then, as Mr. Hockner said, it can be gestured further, I think. And you said that on the site visit, too, that it could be gestured further to the west if it needed to be. But in the event that the tree would require removal, I would add a condition that the owner pay for the removal of the tree and a new, I think it's a Washingtonia, in a location that is approved by the city, since it's a street tree. And the only other condition that I'd add would be same as another one that we saw, that I think that one would belong probably under C1B, the tree one during construction. That's on page 2 of 7 of the draft C of A. And then the other one would be construction, staging, storage and staging. That's on page 4 of 7. And just add that vehicle parking associated with the site development and construction is strictly prohibited at Shoreline Park. And other than that, I'm very comfortable making the findings and approving the coastal development permit. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Bonderson.
Thank you. I would like the opportunity to second this motion. I'm very pleased with this design. I can easily make the findings. I think this is a very beautiful addition to the streetscape, and I feel that it's very compatible with what is happening in this neighborhood. It's following the direction that this neighborhood is evolving, and I think it supports the beauty and the evolution of this community this on the Mesa. I'm comfortable with the motion that Commissioner Wiscombe has.
Vice Chair, if I can jump in.
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe didn't make a motion, but if you want to make the motion, I think that would be appropriate.
How did I miss that? I apologize. I'm used to hearing the motion come from Commissioner Wiscom. So yeah, I'd be happy to make the motion. So let's go ahead and make a motion if you allow me to. And I would like to make the motion per, let's see, I'm looking per the recommendation in the staff report with the additional comments that Commissioner Wiscom has made. But I don't know if I can repeat them. Does Ms. Fennessy have that recorded?
Yes.
Okay.
And I would second it. Vice Chair Bonderson, I assume your motion includes making the findings. They're on page 9 of 58 of our report, last page of the staff report. There's 2 of them. So I assume
Yes.
that
Yes,
the motion includes making the findings.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscom. And yes, I can make the 2 motions under the findings. As Ms. Wiscom said on page 9 of 58, the first one, the project is consistent with the policies of the California Coastal Act as described in section 11C of the staff report. And also the project is consistent with all applicable policies of the city's local coastal plan, all applicable implementing guidelines and the applicable provisions of the code as described in section 11.C of the staff report. And just to make sure that the extra comments that Commissioner Wiscom expressed, make sure that those are part of the motion.
All right. So we have a motion from Vice Chair Bonderson and a second from Commissioner Wiscom. Any discussion? Commissioner Balke?
Mr. Chair, just so folks know where I'm coming from. First off, I support the project as designed. And part of that is this, in reading the neighbor's letter, is that because of the solar ordinance, there really wasn't another location for this house to be located. Before I ever looked at this project, I would have thought it would have been flipped, like everything would have been on the other side, but that would be exactly running against the solar ordinance all the way through. So definitely understand the layout and the site plan. And looking at the streetscape drawing, it's real clear that and for my practice, in any project we do, or I do, if the lot's less than 55 feet, we don't allow garages on the front of the building. And I think that's good that you have the detached garage, or at least at a minimum it would be back 40 feet or so. In this case, having the detached garage allows for additional tandem parking in the driveway, and it's a very parking impact area, so I think it's a good idea. And I honestly, for other applicants that might be coming along Shoreline Drive, I won't support a project that has a garage on the front along Shoreline Drive. So, just putting that out there for future applicants, that they need to be pushed back unless the lot's beyond 55 feet in width or on a corner. So I will support the project as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be supporting the motion. I do have a kind of an overall problem with all of this. These lots are so small that what is happening there, this project fits in with that. And it all came about because of a house to the west where at the time, every possible cubic foot of building was constructed. And the neighborhood preservation ordinance grew out of that house when everybody was taken aback by it. It seems to me that the houses that can be built within the requirements of the zoning still are too big for the lots. But that's the pattern that the city has set. So as I said, I will be supporting the motion. And I appreciated Mr. Oxner's explanation of why the garage is set back, and it makes sense. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commission? All right. I too will be supporting the motion. I appreciate the design. I also especially appreciate your answers to Commissioner Wiscom's questions about the concerns in the public comment letter that we received. And I will be supporting it if we do not have any other comments from the commission. Ms. Fennessy, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Thank you. I'll go ahead and start with Commissioner Lodge,
Yes.
Commissioner Wardlow,
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscom,
Yes.
Commissioner Bauke,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bonderson,
Yes.
and Chair Escobedo.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
All right, and with that, we have a 10-day appeal period unless I get told otherwise. And so thank you to the applicant team. Thank you, Ms. Plummer. We are going to go on a brief recess of 5 minutes, and we'll come back at 1:55. Thank you. everyone. We'll call this meeting back to order at 1:57, a little late. We have, let's see, we have this item 4, which is 42 Helena Avenue. This is a concept review hearing. The project consists of the conversion of an existing 758 square foot, one-story commercial building to a small hotel with 2 guest rooms, shared kitchenette, and shared restroom. And we have Ms. Kennedy here with the staff report. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Escobedo. Kathy Kennedy, the case planner for this project. As you noted, this is a concept review, so there'll be no appealable decision made today. We're just looking for comments from you in regard to their proposal. So here is the project site. It is a relatively small lot located between Mason Street and Cabrillo Boulevard in the Funk Zone. It's approximately 2,500 square feet, and the zoning in this area is OC, which is Ocean-Oriented Commercial. Here's a view of the project site from Helena Street. So it's this small building in between these other buildings on either side. If you look over to the right, it is a building that's built lot to lot, so this area over to the right-hand side is not part of the parcel. I think there's about a 2 or 3 foot setback from the lot line on that end. So the purpose of the concept review hearing today is to review a proposal for a new small hotel with 2 guest rooms and a new outdoor display/storage area for an adjacent e-bike scooter rental company, and that would be in the front portion of the project site. The OC zone allows for a small hotel with a conditional use permit, and one of the requirements for the CUP is that the small hotel be part of a mixed-use project. So they've proposed this outdoor storage use as the other use on the site. So a couple of the questions before you today for you to consider. Is the outdoor storage use adequate to consider this proposal a mixed-use project under that definition of the small hotel needing a CUP? And then is the outdoor storage appropriate for this site overall? So here's the existing site plan. You've been out to the site, most of you. So it's an existing building. Out front is a little landscaped area. There are a couple of bike areas to park bikes here. There's steps up to a very large deck and a large building. That's just all open volume building. And then there's access to a restroom in the back. So that's the existing situation. What they're proposing is to change the front of the parcel. So this area where right now there's a couple of bike racks, have this area be this outdoor display storage area for the e-bikes or scooters for a rental business that's in the vicinity. And then they would utilize the existing building and convert it to a 2-room hotel. There are certain restrictions on the size of the guest rooms. They have to be 300 square feet or less. So there are 2 guest rooms and a kitchenette, and then a shared restroom as well. They'll share the deck in the lobby area as well. So there are some constraints on this site, of course, the lot size being one of them, a little bit over 2,500 square feet. The parcel's located in the flood zone, so the building has been elevated. As it exists currently, there's accessibility requirements, so there is that ramp going up to the building that's been raised. And in regard to parking, there's no parking existing on site. Obviously, there's no room for parking as it's designed currently. It's non-conforming. It has a parking credit of 3 spaces, and that's based on the existing square footage of the existing building. At 1 per 250, 3 spaces would be required. In the OC zone, and this is copied in your staff report, There are a number of uses that are allowed: ocean-dependent, ocean-oriented uses, commercial, recreational uses, arts, restaurants, small stores. I didn't put residential up here, even though in some parts of the OC zone, residential is allowed, but in this area south of the railroad, residential uses are not allowed. And then other ocean-dependent, ocean-oriented, commercial, recreational, or other arts-related uses that are found to be consistent with the intent of the OC zone may be approved by the Planning Commission. And then other uses with the CUP, in this case, the small hotels are allowed with the CUP. The discretionary applications for this particular project would be a coastal development permit due to its location in the coastal zone, a conditional use permit because it's a small hotel, like I said, which is allowed with the CUP in the OC zone, and then design review for any exterior changes by the ABR. So each of those discretionary applications require findings, as you know. So the CDP have these standard findings for a coastal development permit that you're very familiar with. There are standard findings for CUPs, so just overall, any kind of CUP would need to meet these findings. So I'm not going to read through all of them, but essentially, the use has to be deemed essential or desirable, not materially detrimental to the public peace, health, safety, and comfort, not detrimental impact on the surrounding properties, also adequate access and off-street parking, compatible with the character of the area. Just summarizing there. And this is in your staff report, like I said. Then there are specific findings for the CUP for the small hotel. And they are that the small hotel will support the goals of the LCP in the OC zone, promote a vital mixed-use neighborhood in the waterfront, that the small hotel is part of a mixed-use project in a mixed-use setting. So this is really where this has been brought to you, to really talk about the mixed-use part of it. It's not mixed use where it's residential and non-residential, which is what we normally think of. Residential is not allowed. More like you need to have another use on this site. So that's the question today, whether what they're proposing, that outdoor storage area, is appropriate. And also the small hotel must be compatible with the surrounding land uses. And they may include a manager's unit, but in this case, they are not including one. And then these other findings are actually exactly what the other standard CUP findings are. So we've presented a few questions for you to consider. Is an outdoor display storage use adequate to consider the proposal as mixed use? Is an outdoor display storage area appropriate for this site? Can the findings for the CUP be made? Can the findings for the coastal development permit be made? And then another question came up at the site visit, prompting you to consider whether a parking modification would be supportable in order to allow another use, other uses, in case you want to talk about other uses. So we'd like your comments specifically on what's being proposed, but also if you have other ideas about other mixed-use uses that you might find supportable or appropriate for the site. We'd be interested in hearing that as well. And that concludes my presentation. We have the architect and owner here. They don't have a presentation, but they are here to make a few comments and answer questions. And then I also have Michelle Bedard from Transportation Planning, also available as staff if you have questions for her.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you.
And would the applicant team like to give some brief comments? If you could just introduce yourself for the public.
Sure. My name is Henry Cordemanche. I'm the owner and developer of 42 Helena. I grew up in Santa Barbara, have been here my whole life, became a hotel developer a handful of years ago, and in that process acquired this property at 42 Helena. And originally the intent of this property was to develop a hotel. I've since built 4 hotels across California. We have an operating company that manages our hotels, and we see that there's an opportunity here in Santa Barbara for more luxury hospitality. So the goal of this property, as you've seen, is to build 2 units that would, I feel, be accretive to the value of the Funk Zone and Santa Barbara as a whole. We are more than willing to make this a mixed-use project. We have entertained a handful of opportunities of what that could be. The main goal of it being mixed use is to make sure that it just doesn't impact the guests in their stay. So we've actually identified a handful of uses that would be valuable to the guests. Some of those would be like bike rentals was our main finding as a good opportunity for this project, and feel that that could be both useful to the public as well as to the hotel guests. But really, the goal of this project is to use this building. It's been sitting empty for more than 5 years. I purchased my interest about 3 years ago in this building from my current business partner, and we just want to do whatever's best for the city to make sure that this building is used, and it just put it to use because it's been sitting there empty for so long. So that's kind of my piece. Kevin?
Hi, Kevin Moore, architect for the owner. Just to walk you through some of the specifics of the project, as Henry mentioned, the bike rental aspect is interesting. It fulfills some of the guest, kind of typical guest requirements. The location is ideal as it's close to public transportation. There are a number of public parking lots nearby, so if a guest arrives with a car, the operations would recommend parking that vehicle in one of the public lots nearby, and they would bring themselves to the hotel and then hopefully be able to use the bike rentals that are directly in front of the parcel. It may not have been apparent on the rainy morning when you were there, but during the day, Helena Street is sort of chock full of bike rental displays and all sorts of things within the right-of-way. So they're currently, in the photos of the site, there's a truck parked in front. That's actually in the street. There is no sidewalk or area for parking there. So one of the advantages that we discussed is that this could take some of the sort of casual nature of that street and formalize it more for that bike rental company and scooter rental company, so they could have an area outside of the right-of-way, remove some of those barriers in front of other businesses. So in our mind, they win, and I think the city and that street is a little bit better for it. So I think that's it, and we're available for questions.
Thank you. Appreciate it. With that, we will open up public comment for this item. We do not have any speakers list for in-person public comment, but Ms. Fennessy, do we have anyone online?
Thank you. We do not have any remote public commenters, and we did not receive any public comment for this item.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. So we'll turn it to the commission for questions, and we have Commissioner Balke to kick us off.
Mr. Chair, I've got a couple questions for the staff and the applicant to start with. I'll start with the applicant, if you come to the podium. Could you walk us through your knowledge of the history of the use of this property prior to you acquiring it? After visiting it, it led us to a whole lot of what was it used for, was its history over the years, and this whole Funk Zone has changed quite a bit over time.
Yeah.
So if you could give us what you know, it would be helpful.
Yeah, and I'll preface this point with when I purchased it, it was abandoned and empty, and we redeveloped it and put a new skin on it, new cladding, paint. But from our understanding, it was originally used as a fish processing plant. And then once it was decommissioned as a fish processing plant, it was just used as storage by the old owner, and really just was kind of abandoned, and no no upkeep of the property for the previous 15-plus years before we acquired it.
And you did the improvements with the deck and
Yeah.
what we saw out there? Okay, thank
Yep.
you. I think that's the only question I have for you at this time. The other questions are to the city staff. The funk zone has changed over the years and intensified many times. There's a lot of buildings of interesting histories out there. Could you explain the process for that intensification that has gone on as to how parking has been addressed for the funk zone as a whole? Because most of the properties I see out there surely aren't meeting code required parking. So that's one question. And I presume some of them got parking modifications, some of them were vested in some shape or form. Does the city, and so if you could address that, and the second part of it, does the city have a parking district that involves established for the funk zone? There is a public parking structure within a block of this particular site, and I was wondering how the city engages property owners as to whether or not there are parking modifications or in lieu fees or any kind of mechanism going on with the funk zone and that parking structure that allows these intensifications to happen. So that's my set of questions. Thank you.
So thank you for those questions. I may have to defer to Allison on some of these. I know I've worked on just one other project that is going to be before you at some point, and you did review it, the 35 Anacapa Street project, which is went before you as a concept review and looked at a parking modification for that. So that was a potential project that would utilize the parking modification pathway for approval. I don't have a lot of history on other projects and how we've dealt with parking in that area. That's why I would like to see if Allison can address that part.
Thank you, Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Bauke. I will start with your second question, as whether or not we have a parking district. We do not. The Garden Street parking lot is essentially all of those parking spaces are allocated to other public uses in the area. So there aren't any extra spaces that are available to be used as a parking district. And to do that, we would need a local coastal plan amendment. It's something that's been talked about, but it just has not moved forward. And I would say in the funk zone in general, most of those properties are non-conforming. So they got legal credit for parking. A lot of them have zero parking, as you know. And so the uses have changed over, but they've maintained their non-conforming parking credit. There are very few sites where we've actually approved modifications. One of them would be the 11 Anacapa site, which the Planning Commission saw maybe 2 years ago. You approved a parking modification for that site. But the rest of them are legal non-conforming.
Good, thank you. So, that being the case, I mean, I'll put this out there to the applicant. Have you ever thought of other uses other than a hotel? Because to me, the site screams, wine tasting, public event, adjunct space to the beer garden next door, or adjunct space for the hotel to have, wedding events or, it just seems like it's not, the hotel, in my opinion, which is, it seems like a pathway you want to go, doesn't seem like the highest and best use of the property, but, would you consider other uses in a hotel? I know that's your business line, but the question is, would you be interested in going forward on something else than that?
I completely understand, and I agree, actually, that this building doesn't seem like a natural fit for a hotel. Our constraints around this project are all stem from parking. So where do you justify the cost of this property in the funk zone with only allowing 6 people in the building at any given time? It doesn't support a wine bar, it doesn't support a brewery or a restaurant concept. So we kind of struggled to find another alternative option that would support a business, that a business model would support for this space while only allowing 6 people in the structure at any given time.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Bauke. Commissioner Wardlow?
Thank you, Chair. So you answered one of my questions for the applicant. That was this building purchased with the goal of opening a small boutique hotel?
It was not purchased.
If you can step up and, for the folks at home.
It was not purchased with the goal of a hotel. It was initially purchased with no intent in mind. I purchased from my business partner who is, he's owned it for 5 years, and I purchased my interest about 3 years ago. And when I invested in the property, I came along with the goal of, my goal was to turn it into a hotel, but it had gone through iterations and other ideas for a business there before I came along. Some of those ideas were like a bodega style retail shop, which is one option that we've considered in the past, though there were blockers around parking, and there was a handful of other issues that we came across that didn't support the bodega model. And then that's when we stumbled upon the idea for a hotel. Originally, we didn't know that it was under the small hotels overlay, so when I was involved, the plan was to build a larger hotel there, and now we've just decided to work within the confines of what the city has put in place.
Okay, thank you. I have some questions for staff. So first question, the applicant mentioned that there's a occupancy cap of 7, I think he said. There's 6. So is that like only 6 people can be in this building regardless of anything having to do with parking? Is that accurate?
I'd like them to explain that a little bit more. I don't know if he's talking about the, well, I'm not sure, actually.
Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Wiscombe, I believe the applicant was referring to the limit on the number of seats that are allowed. If this were to be a restaurant or wine bar, it's basically 1 parking space per 3 seats. They have a credit for 3 parking spaces, therefore they could have a total of 9 seats, and I believe that's what he was referring to.
Okay.
So I have no idea what the actual building or fire code occupancy would be.
Wonderful. Okay, that's very helpful. My next question is, so I read the staff report, and there's a lot of references to this area of town, what was discussed in the 90s, what was discussed in 2004, and in 2004 it seems that the Planning Commission really had an interest in supporting and incentivizing small hotels with the concept that these would be affordable. I think today, with Airbnb existing and short-term rentals where they are, we're in a very different place. I do not see us wanting to incentivize small luxury hotels, especially in an area that is now a real beating heart of a vibrant wine area and experiences that brings community together, that's not for, 2 wealthy people that can come and spend the weekend in the heart of what used to be, and what still is to a degree right next to that building, a number of artists and art studios and wineries. And to me, that use could be much more complementary to the future of the Funk Zone, especially when we are all moving in the direction as a community towards, what are uses that will last a long time, meaning restaurant experiences and then actual experiences for communities, like maybe having a place where people can come and take art classes and drink wine, or do pottery and drink wine. And so if the main inhibitor to this is just a parking requirement, is that really what this all comes down to, is a parking modification that would be needed, that is already granted to by just default through non-conforming to many of the businesses that exist there today? Is that right?
Commissioner Escobedo, or Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Wiscombe, I'm sorry, Commissioner Wardlow, somewhat. So similar to other businesses, this property, although it has 0 parking spaces, they do have a credit for 3 parking spaces.
Great.
So certain uses that have a parking requirement of 1 per 250 square feet could go in there. But you're correct, to do anything more intensive than that, that has a different parking requirement, the parking is the stumbling block.
Okay, well, this is really helpful. That's the remainder of my questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Wiscombe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so I'm going back to the small hotel and the questions about the outdoor display storage use. Is it adequate for the CUP? And I did email Ms. Kennedy some questions, so I'm just going to go through those. I told her I'd ask them at the commission meeting, because I think that's where they belong. But, okay, so if you go to the staff report on page 8 of 20, under number 5, it says, "The Planning Commission shall have the authority to approve the design of open space." And I asked Ms. Kennedy, what does this mean? And is this the area in front of the building where the proposed display storage area is to go? And do we have lots of latitude there, or?
So this particular site does not have an open space requirement like others do and places in the city, but you have the authority to review and approve a site plan. So the areas on the site plan, in part being this front area in the front, is
Part of the site
part of
plan.
your site plan, part of your purview.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And so if the planning commission, can the planning commission require that the display/storage for bicycles be associated with one specific business in the vicinity? That's part one. Part two is, if so, what happens if that business is no longer viable in the future? What happens to that CUP?
So we would not tie it to a specific business, but we would say that the applicant would currently be working with this particular business, but that if they choose to use another business, they could. And I think the applicant may want to talk about this because I think they have a few different options. It's not just one option. They have a few in the area. So it would be used by a business nearby, so not one particular. And it would be like any other mixed use where things, sometimes they close down temporarily. There's a time when the use isn't being used, so there's potential for that. If they were, though, to want to have some other kind of storage use other than what would be approved under the CUP, they'd have to come back and we'd have to review it again.
Okay, so they'd have to actually get a revision or a new CUP, whatever that happened to be,
Yes.
depending upon the use. Okay, that's great. And then on page 20 of 20 in our staff report, is that right? Yeah, the last page. Code section 28.71.070B, outdoor living space. That was cited here. So what are the applicable provisions of outdoor living space for this site? Are there any, or?
So that part of the OC zone only applies to the residential.
Okay,
There are certain areas in the OC zone that allow residential. This site does not, so
okay.
that does not apply.
Good, okay, okay. That's great, thank you, Ms. Kennedy. So now, my last question, I think, is, okay, let me ask Ms. Kennedy this question first, because I'm going in a different direction here. If this building's been blank for so long and you really feel, this might be a great hotel space for a family, you know, that they share a restroom and, you know. So art galleries are allowed. So in the, Ms. Kennedy, in the display storage area, could that actually be an outdoor art gallery?
So I
That
think that's,
we're-
that could be. That is an allowed use. It's
Okay.
interesting. So it'd be great to hear your comments about that.
Okay, so I just want to ask the applicant if this is something you might consider, because I did I'm not really excited about the bicycle thing. That's not, my opinion isn't important. What's important is, you know, what we do for land use and what's allowed and what isn't. But just personally, I wasn't really excited about that. And I was wondering, you know, the Funk Zone is really an art-related area. And so I Googled sculptors in Santa Barbara, and I came up with Santa Barbara Sculptors Guild that the website says they've been there since 1965, and the Community Arts Workshop, we all know about that. And then there's the Arts Advisory Committee with the city. And I'm wondering if you might consider doing some sort of a contest and having a couple local artists do sculptures for that outdoor space, and then they can advertise, so when people see them, they can, you know, contact them if they want and get commissions.
I think that's an amazing idea. It's accretive to our guest experience, and that's at the end of the day what I care about the most is how this mixed-use aspect is going to affect our guests' usage of the property, and I think that's potentially an even better use for that area because our guests have, to the earlier point, which was there's multiple bike rental shops on that street already, so I don't think it creates a ton of value to our guests or to the community at large to have the bike rental there, though I do think that this art installation would, first of all, make the property beautiful and would be great for our guest experience.
Okay, I'm glad that's the right answer. Because I was pretty excited about it when I started to think about, you know, what could that space be used for that, you know, meets that can trigger Planning Commission to approve a CUP for that because they've got the appropriate space. And it seems to me this is much more exciting, and it could be really exciting for the artists in the Funk Zone. I don't know how many sculptures you could get on there, depending upon, you know, how big they were or something. But you could certainly have a call for artists to design. I'm sure that's free display space for in an area where display space is really limited. So that would be what I would push for. But other than that, I will certainly answer the questions that were asked of us. So that's just food for thought.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lodge and then Vice Chair Bonderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really like Commissioner Wiscombe's idea, too. It is genuinely a use that would be specific to the property, and I think it's a great idea. I do want to say that whenever I've gone down Helena Street and past that building, it's made me smile, and I'm so glad it's being kept as it is. And I don't have a problem with it being a hotel, although rooms are like the last thing Santa Barbara needs. But I understand why it's being proposed. How many square feet are there available to you?
The square footage in the front yard, is that what you're asking?
No, in the building. Within the building, how much space do you have?
It's a little over 700 square feet.
758 is, I think, what was said in the presentation. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed it. And I missed what you said, Commissioner Wiscombe.
758 square feet.
758 square feet. Okay, I was just wondering why you chose to have a separate kitchen and then a separate shared kitchen and a shared bathroom for the two rooms. It seems that you could arrange it so that you had your 300 square feet that included, you know, the usual microwave and a small fridge in each room, and then use the space that is indicated for the separate kitchen as a bathroom for the front unit. I realize you have to calculate the hallway space and all of that, and it just didn't work out for you to do a different arrangement, or had you considered such an arrangement?
Commissioner Lodge, we looked at multiple configurations, and unfortunately, the restrictions for these small hotel findings and the square footages, rules regarding kitchenettes within the rooms really pushed us to, and just the configuration of the existing building really pushed us to what we have today in front of you.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Vice Chair Bonderson?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And hello, Mr. Moore. It's nice to see you in the room. I always appreciate when you come forth with concept review and giving everyone a chance to chime in. I hope that, hearings like this are useful to the applicant. So I wanted to start by saying I really appreciate what Commissioner Wiscombe was moving towards with the gallery space. It was one of the things I also had on my list. But I want to take that idea one step further. I know that in this particular area, there are art galleries, there are art studios. It makes a lot of sense to put art here. But I would like to also suggest the idea to introduce something that doesn't yet exist or we don't have enough of in the downtown area, the Funk Zone area. And that is small open spaces for small private events. Now, I know we have a lot of, event centers, and we have the Cabrillo Pavilion, and we have rooms in the hotel that we can rent for big parties and weddings, but I'm talking about that small, intimate space. And the reason I bring that up is because I grew up in Santa Barbara, and a lot of times when we would do an office party for the holidays or for special occasions, we would have difficulty finding that size space that would be appropriate for our office. And we didn't want to spend all the money to get a huge ballroom at the Bacara or over at the Hilton or whatnot. We wanted something intimate and small. And very often we would rent wineries, just the winery on the next street over, I think it's Corks and Crowns. That was a space that was very appropriate for what we were looking for. And so I really want to say that if the direction we all go here today, that we can support you in today, allows for a reduction of parking or offsite parking completely, and whatever it is that you end up sort of being attracted to also consider a secondary use of private events and renting out that space. So if we are moving in the direction of a gallery, using the opportunity to display an artist's work while putting an event in there gets more attention towards the art. And when Commissioner Wiscombe was talking, it made me think of the Cabrillo Pavilion. And anytime we rent that space, there's art on the walls. And that art does not come down. It's part of the agreement that when you take that space, it comes with the art. And this could be very similar, but at a much smaller scale. Perhaps for artists that are starting out, may not have the grandeur yet to be in a bigger space, or don't have necessarily the funds or the access for a greater space. And so one of the particular things I wanted to mention as far as private events is creating events such as inviting guest chefs to do small intimate parties where we buy tickets to go dine. That's something I've always loved to do. Anytime I see it, I try to grab tickets for things like that. But we don't have a lot of that here. We don't have enough of that here. Another one is dance type events. And I'm not sure if this zone would accommodate that, but I think that if we had the opportunity to rent out a space of this size for smaller type dance events like a salsa night or a swing night, where it could be a regular form of revenue, but it also isn't a permanent use. And with that being said, I can speak a personal experience. Whenever we try to find an event space like a restaurant that we would like to perhaps have that type of a music event, there are music permits and rules of that zone where you might not be able to play music past 10 o'clock or past a certain hour. And so if this zone accommodates that, I would certainly suggest looking into that, getting an alcohol permit, getting a music permit, and having that freedom to use that space for multiple uses all at once. And so now that I've expressed the interest I have, I'd like to ask staff, if and a CUP would be required to change the use. Is there a wide enough range of uses that could be put, that would be acceptable to be put on a CUP that would allow the applicant to shift uses or have multiple uses on the same application? And I'm going to do a part B on this before you answer. If they start with a use and it doesn't pan out to be working and they want to change the use, can we find a way to describe the scope on the CUP that will support them to not have to come back and get a change of use or another application, right away or frequently? Can we give them a wide enough scope? Does that exist from the city's standpoint?
Commissioner Bonderson, I'll answer the second portion first. Yes, I think there would be ways to condition it would really be conditioning the coastal development permit, because the conditional use permit is only for the hotel. So it would be related to the coastal development permit, and generally you would have to consider certain types of uses, and then you could draft the conditions to include uses such as this, this, and this. And of course, staff would need to confirm that parking works for all of those proposed uses. Often what we do in those types of cases as well is we'll have a condition that allows the community development director to consider other uses that are consistent with the uses that were specifically approved, and then the director can determine if the use is within that scope or if it needs to get bumped up to Planning Commission for review. With regard to the private event space, I think that gets a little bit more difficult. Restaurants are allowed in the OC zone, but there's nothing that talks about event space, and so I think for the Planning Commission to consider that, it would need to be under the letter G, which is the OC uses found consistent. But that does limit it to ocean-dependent, ocean-oriented, commercial, recreational, or arts-related uses. And so that might be a difficult finding for the Planning Commission to make.
I'm so sad to hear that. And out of curiosity, how do the hotels do it? We have hotels across the street. So when they have an event like a wedding, of course, that's much grander, but when they have an event where they rent out their ballroom or have a business type event, how do they do it in this zone?
Vice Chair Bonderson, most of the hotels are not in this zone. In fact, I don't believe we have any hotels in this zone. The hotels are in the HRC zone, which is adjacent to the OC zone. But within that zone, it specifically talks about restaurants and convention center type uses, and so that's built into that zone.
Ms. DeBusk, forgive me, I guess I didn't look closely enough. The hotel that's across the street, Hotel California, is it not in the same zone? Is there a boundary that changes right there?
Vice Chair Bonderson, yes, that is a different zone. It's the HRC zone.
Okay, I am so sorry. I was misled by myself. Darn it, I got really excited. Okay, and then my last question here goes back to staff, and it is a question I asked Ms. Kennedy. I hope that you had the opportunity, Ms. Kennedy, to perhaps take it back to your team and get the answer. What are the chances, or how high is the chance to find supportability for this property for off-site parking, to really allow them to have the ability to take their parking off-site to be able to use this property for a different use completely than that it is currently limited to?
Thank you for that question. So we typically would be supportive of a parking modification when the project meets demand only, and I'm not sure, originally when we looked at different uses with the applicant, those uses the demand wouldn't be met on site. So it would really be up to the Planning Commission whether you feel like you are willing to approve a parking modification for a particular use on that site. So I'm kind of sending it back to you for your opinion on whether you would be open to that, actually.
And thank you, Ms. Kennedy. And I'm just going to put it out there right now that I would absolutely support and approve a parking modification for this almost regardless of what you applicant decides to do here. I want to be supportive of making sure that we are not limited to hotel use. I'm really uncomfortable and hope not to see a hotel use here. I do want to ask one more question that just came to my thoughts, and it may go back to Mr. Busk. I understand that events, the way that you just read G, that events would have to be limited to the use. I can't remember exactly verbatim what you said, but if this project were to become an art gallery and they would have then an event that supports that use, would they be allowed to have music past a certain time, or is that a limitation in this zone?
Vice Chair Bonderson, the city's noise ordinance requires music to stop at 10 o'clock. So that's not the zone, that's throughout the city. That is the time that all amplified music is supposed to stop. And in terms of anything else, as you mentioned, you know, as I said, restaurants are an allowed use in this zone. And so if the type of event space fell within that definition, then it would be something that's acceptable. If the approved use was an art gallery and they were doing special events, those do sometimes require coastal exemptions to be issued for the special event unless it's exempt from one of those permits.
And I don't know much about that. So under those exemptions, would they be able to get permission to have music for that purpose? Or is that a different approach? Is there a different approach to get music or amplified noise, as you said?
Vice Chair Bonderson, I would have to look into that more closely. I don't deal with our special event permits very often or with temporary events in the coastal zone. So I would have to look into whether music could just be part of a restaurant use or if it would require something in addition to that.
Thank you. I'm going to throw one more question your way. It'll be my final question. How do nightclubs handle that permission to play music past 10 p.m.?
Vice Chair Bonderson, nightclubs need special permits from the police department. I believe we have a separate dance permit that is required, but I don't believe they're allowed to play amplified music past 10 o'clock. So that's just a citywide
Really?
ordinance.
Oh my, so there's a conflict right there. Oh gosh. Okay, well, we don't want to shut them down, so we'll stop talking now. Back to you, Chair. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Commissioner Wardlow, do you have questions before I jump in?
Sorry, I just have some clarifying questions. First, for city staff again, so just so we're perfectly clear to the last question, would a parking modification be supported in order to allow another use? So are we saying that if we, the Planning Commission, agree that we are comfortable with some type of parking modification, that then this can be a use outside of a hotel? Like, it could be a restaurant, it could be a wine bar, it could be any of those things. It just needs to be mixed use, so it could be a wine bar and an art gallery, or a restaurant and a like pottery thing. Is that right?
Commissioner Wardlow, close. So if it was another use, it doesn't need to be mixed use.
Great.
So
Perfect.
it could just be a restaurant or it could
Even
just
better.
be a wine bar. However, it would require a parking modification, and in order to approve a parking modification, the Planning Commission needs to make a finding that parking demand will be met on site. So typically, we would have someone prepare a parking demand study that would explain, identify whether or not parking demand can be met, and then the Planning Commission would determine if they agree with the conclusions of that report.
Okay, and understanding that there's, a good amount of public parking in the area and the direction that we're going with, Uber and Lyft basically servicing that area substantially, just spitballing here, would we be able to make that kind of finding? Or are you saying that we're going to have to be able to say that, there is actually 10 parking spaces available due to levels of congestion on the street today, like after a traffic study? Is that the level that we'd have to be able to find to?
Commissioner Wardlow, I don't know. I will say that for another parking modification in the area that was approved recently, they did take into consideration Uber, Lyft,
Great.
bicycling, the fact that people are walking from one use to another, and these
Yes.
aren't necessarily their primary destination. However, street parking and public parking do not play into that.
Oh.
And also, that other project did provide some parking. So
Okay.
in this case, there's 0 parking on site, so it might be a little bit more difficult.
But it would be up to the planning commission to make the findings that due to the massive increase of transportation network companies that are now servicing this area and the fact that a lot of people are biking and walking and the walkability of downtown Funk Zone, State Street, all of the direction that we're moving in, this commission can find that we can make a modification that would allow this technically.
Commissioner Wardlow, yes, ultimately, it would be up to the planning commission.
Wonderful. Okay. Can I have a question to the applicant? So I understand that you obviously have the intention of building a hotel as that is your business. Understanding that you did buy the property not in the, with the assumption of doing a hotel, but more of an open mind. And given that you're from Santa Barbara and are probably familiar with the Funk Zone, would you be open if this commission was willing to grant you a parking modification? Would you be open to a use that is different from a hotel that's more, aligned with the direction of the Funk Zone, like a winery, like a bar, whatever?
I would be.
Wonderful. That's the remainder of my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Wardlow. So that was also my question, so thank you. Mr. Buss, this might be for you. Commercial, recreational, what kind of uses fall in that category?
Chair Escobedo, rental of bicycles, rental of rollerblades.
I see.
Boats, anything that is something recreational that would be rented.
I see, thank you. From the staff perspective, I know that something like a parking modification ultimately falls to Planning Commission to make findings and make a decision on that. Do staff have a concern about, if Planning Commission did go that route, support for a parking modification? Because I think, looking at this use, it looks like a use that is kind of being forced into conditions that exist and requirements. It may, with that parking modification, I agree with the sentiment that was shared by Commissioner Wardlow and Commissioner Bauke that there's probably a better use for that space. And I'm interested to hear what sort of concerns there are about the possibility of a parking modification.
Chair Escobedo and Planning Commission, Michelle Bedard with Public Works Transportation. As Mr. Busk mentioned earlier, generally speaking, to support a parking modification, transportation staff looks at a parking demand study and determines whether or not we can support it if parking demand is met on site. And with 0 parking spaces on site, staff would generally recommend not supporting a parking modification.
And I guess a couple of things. So one, it was mentioned at the site visit that there's a new state law that may play a role in terms of parking requirements. Have we had any time to take a look at what it would mean for a parcel like this one?
Chair Escobedo, very good question. And to my knowledge at this point, we are still digesting that new state legislation and don't have a response for you at this time.
Okay.
Chair Escobedo, I would mention that we have asked some specific questions related to that to the Coastal Commission, because some of our main questions are how does that state law interact with coastal law and our adopted local coastal program. So we're trying to dig into that further.
Okay, thank you. And I guess back to the first question that I had asked about, I think you said with no on-site parking, typically staff would probably not advise for a parking modification. But for sites that are constrained in this way, in areas where there is other transportation options, and there is the fact that when you go to the funk zone, you're probably going to a couple of places. You're not just sticking to one destination. Is that taken into consideration when staff come up with their recommendation for a parking modification?
Yeah, Chair Escobedo and Commissioners, thank you. As I'm going to kind of replay the message that Ms. DeBusk answered earlier, it's really into consideration of if any parking is also provided on site. We do take that into consideration like we have in other park situations where there are some parking spaces met on site that we will consider, you know, additional alternative transportation, bicycles, Uber, Lyft, et cetera. But that's typically up until this point, cases where there have been parking provided on site.
Thank you. And I believe Commissioner Wardlow wants to jump in.
One last question. As a process question, just so I understand, if staff were to come back and say that they recommended denying the modification, this commission could still have returned that and recommend the modification, correct?
Commissioner Wardlow, yes, that is correct.
Okay. Another question for the applicant. I appreciate your openness to different uses. My next question would be, would you have a preference? Like, would this be a benefit to you if we were able to do a parking modification and then you were able to pursue a winery, bar, restaurant, whatever?
I would need to do some more homework on my end, frankly, to answer that question. We haven't entertained any other ideas at this point, so I don't know what implications that has from a revenue perspective versus a hotel or any other usage of the property. Though I'm willing to work with the city on this front. I want this property to be operational. Right now, it's just sitting empty, doesn't make any money. So I would be willing to entertain and do my homework and research on my end to find a usage that that works for this property. So yes, I'm open to ideas.
Okay, thank you. And then again, so without the hotel, we do not have to do a CUP, correct? Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. So I don't see any other questions, and I want to direct us to the screen where we are prompted with 5 questions.
Chair, Commissioner,
yes.
excuse me. I was just speaking with the applicant, and they just reminded me and asked if I would relay to the commissioner that the adjacent parcel at 11 Anacapa apparently went through a parking modification, got approved, and got appealed, and it added like considerable amount of time to their project. So the applicant just wanted me to mention that on their behalf.
Sounds great. Commissioner Wiscombe, did you have a?
Did it get appealed for number of spaces, or did it get appealed for, I thought it was accessibility?
Commissioner Wiscombe, the appeal was of the parking modification, but accessibility was part of the concern.
Okay, okay. Yeah, because we ended up, they're doing parking stacker there now, aren't they? Yeah, okay, thank you. I just, if we're going into deliberations, I was ready to go.
Kick us off.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So we have questions before the Planning Commission, and I appreciate the amount of effort that goes into the creative effort and the thinking about what the space could be used for, and the owner's time, and time is money, and there's private property rights. And if you want to do a hotel on the property, and under a conditional use permit with an outdoor display / storage area, I personally, as a commissioner, would be agreeable to that. I would like to see the outdoor display storage area be something more creative than a rack of bicycles. I really got pretty excited about the sculpture idea. You know, there might even be a possibility to put 1 or 2 on the deck, you know, for advertisement. So for the questions that were being asked, can the findings for a conditional use permit be made? I'm going to say yes. And can the findings for a coastal development permit be be made, yes. This site is, in this area of town, is really the funk of the funk zone, especially this street. So I think there are perhaps reasons to have a small hotel there. I don't envision that you're going to rent the 2 rooms to 2 people that don't know each other. I think it might be a perfect opportunity for a family to stay there. They share the restroom. They have a small kitchenette they can cook in. They don't have to eat out all the time and pay a lot of money. And enjoy Santa Barbara. I don't have a problem with that. On the additional question, which we asked Ms. Kennedy to add to the slide after the site visit, would a parking modification be supportable in order to allow another use? I think that's really a question that we cannot answer at this time. We don't know what staff's recommendation is. We've never approved, in the years I've been on Planning Commission, we have never approved a project for a parking modification that has 0 parking. Now, that may change in the future. This is a very small space, so, you know, I can't imagine, but there's, I think it would be really, really difficult without knowing exactly what the proposal is, because we have to make findings. So I agree with my fellow commissioners that, you know, there might be other uses for this site, and I think that's, you know, as the property owner, that's something that you should consider based on the comments that were made up here today. But, you know, I know you've advanced your project enough to get and paid for a concept review with Planning Commission, so you may just want to go through with the small hotel with the CUP and the display storage area out front, which I would be able to support. And I think that's, I liked some of the other ideas. I think some of them are perhaps less controllable on occupancy. I don't know what the occupancy requirements would be for a building that's 758 square feet, plus you've got the deck, and if you did another use there, that's something that I can't really, the ideas are exciting, but I can't really comment on, because all the blocks aren't there yet for, they're just blanks right now. So I think that's really all I have to say, but I think it's a great looking building, and I think it would look really super with a sculpture garden out front for a display storage area. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Balke?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners and applicant, you've got a project here which you spent a lot of time and money on, and I'm supportive of you doing that if that's what you want to do and you find that to be, you know, your best case scenario. I personally believe it's far from the highest and best use of this property. I would strongly support a parking modification in your particular situation. I would say, based on my experience, you know, this is very similar to what I saw in the Plaza District of the City of Orange or downtown Seal Beach, that you have historic areas which have parking constraints based on zoning codes that don't match up with the physical situation, and a desire for the community to have a walkable, viable location. And the only way in those 2 cases I was able to solve this parking problem is to look holistically at the entire district and establish an in-loop process with parking modifications and a funding stream. May it be now the way to do it would be an infrastructure finance district or a parking district, but to actually look at this thing holistically, because this is not going to be the first and last request that we're going to see for intensifications. we're going to see other projects within the funk zone over time. And we really need to look at this whole thing holistically and figure out what the future vision of the funk zone is, how far we want it to go. It does compete against State Street some, so we have to take that from an economic standpoint. But there needs to be a way to allow buildings like this to go to its best use and be supportive of what's being done in that area. And then that may be something we need to ask the council to authorize staff to do, or as a commission to ask staff to start looking at a parking program for the funk zone. So I just want to put you out there that I would support your modification. I think the city can get you there, but there's some work they'd have to do to get you to a system and a program that would get you there. And with that, I would definitely would say I'd support your application if you came in with it, but I just feel real bad that that's not the highest and best use of your property. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Belke. Commissioner Wardlow?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for entertaining all of my questions. I feel like this was very helpful. For me, in reading the staff report and really seeing how much we are relying on justifications from 1990s and the 2004, and when we were, as a policy, actively incentivizing small hotels. Today, we're in a very different place, and I feel that this applicant may have not pursued a small hotel if it wasn't encouraged through our own zoning and plans that we have outlined. Today, I would say that we're in a very different place with the funk zone. In no way am I looking to see more luxury small hotels. I think this is something that we as a community are, dealing with on an ongoing basis. And for the heart of the funk zone, I do not feel like that is the best use of this. Nor do I think that, a CUP with a mixed use, with it being something that's as lightly sketched out, I find that a little bit concerning. But more so, it's the fact that it is, if our goal is to really look at the future planning of this, and you are a relatively new property owner, I want to set you up to be successful and be a property owner for a very long time. And to a lot of the points that we've raised as a commission, if the city's zoning and the policies we have are constraining your ability to put forward a use that would actually benefit the community as a whole, then it's on us to really work through that to make it so that you do put forward a use that is beneficial to everyone. So for me, I will not support the CUP, but I would definitely support a modification, because I think, as we've all outlined here, the zoning, the parking requirements, all of this is outdated. The rationale provided is literally antithetical to the way in which we want to move forward. And as noted in the staff report, it specifically says, the appropriateness must be considered in context of the entire zone, not just the specific lot, as the Planning Commission's direction would apply to the OC zone as a whole. I'm very concerned with the idea that we would allow a conditional use to move forward for a hotel, which is the direct opposite of the direction in which we want to move forward with for this zone. So to me, it makes sense that this commission work hard and work with city staff to do the necessary parking modifications so that this can be a use for the long-term longevity that will comply and add value to the funk zone versus, this could be a short-lived, a hotel that has 2 rooms. I just don't, obviously, I'm not an expert on these things. I just feel that this is an opportunity for us to get it right. And I want to make sure that our city is supporting your ability to do that and allowing you the flexibility as possible. In the long term, if we're able to do this, this would be more beneficial to you, I would say. And I love this area of the funk zone. I feel really passionate and personal about it. And I want to make sure we're bringing in uses that complement. And also that we're setting precedent, that we're moving in the direction away from cars, and that we're moving in this idea of a more walkable society. This would be a project that would support that. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Wardlow. Vice Chair Bonderson?
Yes, thank you. Well, that was a hard act to follow. I just want to say that I agree with absolutely every single thing that Commissioner Wardlow just said, and I don't want to take more time repeating it and trying to put it into my own words. I'm just going to say ditto to everything. And it was she articulated exactly what I was thinking and how I feel about this property and this zone. And I want to just add one thing, and that would be that I encourage the owner, the applicant, to consider any options that would be worth working towards, so that if one idea doesn't work, that you have a little bit of a backup plan to be able to switch the use without having to come back for permits. And so that you could have more of a fluid transition into using that space, and make sure that that becomes part of your application. I absolutely support a parking modification to encourage any other use here other than a hotel. And as I mentioned before, everything else I want to say, Commissioner Wardlow said for me. So just ditto the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bonderson. Commissioner Lodge?
Chair, for the questions that are up on the screen, I could say, you know, what the applicant came forward with. I could say yes to each of the first 4 bullet points. The additional question would depend on what it's for, and you know, it's a little hard to say, oh yeah, I'm going to say yes to it when I don't know what it would be applying to. It's clear everybody here wants to see you have a use there that is successful for you and for the funk zone. So, and I certainly agree with that. This whole thing with the small hotel business, I'd like to remind the commission that about a year ago, we approved a 2-hotel project within one building right behind this on Santa Barbara Street, right behind 42 Helena, which was a way of sort of working around the ordinance. And I kind of wonder if maybe we shouldn't be looking at the ordinance itself. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you,
Chair
Commissioner Lodge.
Escobedo,
Yes.
just to clarify, that project hasn't been approved. You did review it on a conceptual level, but that's not actually approved yet.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Commissioner Wardlow, did you have additional comments?
No, thank you very much.
Okay. I too am in support of your proposed project. I can say yes to all 4 of those. I love the idea of an art gallery, whether it's sculptures or something. I think that's a clever solution. But if it were storage like proposed, I could support that as well. I do share the perspective that I think that there's probably a better use for this property, but and I would support a parking modification to give you the flexibility to provide a use that you think is best. If you think a hotel is best, so be it, but having that flexibility. On our part, and I like the idea from Commissioner Bauke of having a parking program for this area to apply to situations like this. I think sometimes that we have these policies on the books and we just enforce policies, but we forget why they exist or why they were created. And we, I think, need to be a little more flexible to allow, as we transition into different phases of commercial properties and we start seeing redevelopment, particularly in the funk zone where there's not going to be a lot of parking, we should be more flexible. We should be trying to find solutions. And sometimes I think we're a little too quick to get to know rather than trying to navigate possible solutions. So I could support this. I love this property. It's a beautiful building. I'm excited for there to be a use there. And if I'll kind of open it up if there are additional comments from the commission. And if not, to the applicant team, do you feel like you have adequate enough information to move forward in the process? All right. Well, thank you so much. I like these concept reviews. But we will close out this item And thank you to the applicant team. Thank you to staff for being here. Tremendous presentation, and thank you for answering all of our questions. And so with that, we will close out item 4, and we will go to item 5, which is committee and liaison reports. Do we have any committee or liaison reports? Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the Single Family Design Board on October 24th, saw 2 projects that will be coming to the Planning Commission because they need coastal development permits. One's at 2501 Medcliff, and the other's at 2339 Edgewater. Both involve demolition of an existing house and construction of a new one. On the Historic Landmarks Commission on October 26th, reviewed a proposal to create a landmark of the divider in the landscaping in the middle of State Street between Constance and Mission Street. It's been there since the 20s. And there's an effort to kind of perk it up. And so they were, and the commission was all in support of forwarding it to the proposal for landmarking to the city council. And those are my reports.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Vice Chair Bonderson, do you have a committee liaison report?
Hi. Please excuse the noise in the background. I just wanted to let you guys know that we, part of the state's, I'm sorry about that, the State Street Advisory Committee is holding a number of outreach workshops throughout the downtown. We just had one last week, which was considered an open house held at 1230A State Street. And there's going to be a number of workshops and little pop-ups happening in the next few weeks throughout November, and then again a big community engagement event that will be held December 9th and 10th. So I just wanted to let everyone know, if you're interested in these types of events, if you're wanting to attend any of them, that you should please pay attention to the announcements that are on the website, and you're welcome to reach out to me. But I really would love you all to know that these are taking place. So that's all. Lots of things to look forward to in the month of November and December.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bonderson. Any other committee or liaison reports? Not seeing any. So we will end this meeting at 3:14. Thank you, everyone, and have a great weekend.